I grew up in a real messed up family. My dad was never home. He worked for some big arms company in Europe and spent most of his time lubricating shady backdoor deals in the former Eastern Bloc. We didn't miss him when he was away because whenever he was home, it felt like a great dark cloud was hanging over our house. Everything we did was wrong, nothing was ever good enough, and he made life impossible for me, my brother, and my mom. My mom gave up on trying to parent us when she realized just how rotten we both were, me and my brother, I mean. She spent most of her days either drinking or high on Valium, and only ever emerged from her bedroom whenever we were being too obnoxious and loud. My brother, my older brother, liked motorcycles and spent most of his time either riding them, working on them, or buying them. Me, on the other hand, I somehow found an even more dangerous hobby. If my brother worshipped speed, I worshipped self-destruction of all varieties. I took up smoking, started cutting, and with my hefty monthly allowance in hand, managed to become acquainted with some of the city's less scrupulous purveyors of narcotics. From the age of around 14 onwards, all I was interested in was chasing that next high, and after 2 years of frying my brain with almost everything I could get my hands on, I suffered a kind of psychotic break and attempted to burn down my family home with my mother and brother asleep in their beds. First of all, no one was hurt, and I'm eternally grateful for that, but the fire spread quickly and the amount of structural damage it inflicted to the house was catastrophic. My family was furious with me, and obviously so. We had to find some place to live while extremely expensive repairs were being done. Only, it wasn't going to be we, as my mom and dad had suddenly decided. They were going to find a hotel, maybe a rental home once they were settled, but me, I was headed to Jamaica. Now I know what you might be thinking. Jamaica, as in the tropical island paradise? How is that a punishment? Well, if you put down your narrow stereotypes for one moment, allow me to give you a brief but informative lesson in geography. Yes, lots of Jamaica is palm trees and white sandy beaches, but on the southwestern coast, the scenery changes quite dramatically. You go from tropical island paradise to something that looks more like Texas plains country in just 20 miles or so, and that's the part of Jamaica I ended up going to. Because I wasn't there for vacation. I was there for a behavioral rehabilitation program so harsh that it was literally illegal to run back in the United States. The program was run by 2 Americans out of a place they called Tranquility Bay, which turned out to be just about as ironic a name as they could possibly have picked. It cost $20,000 to send me there for 6 months. That's some people's salaries. I should have come back and invented Google for that kind of money. Instead, I found out that they had next to no idea what they were doing. I remember having to go to a doctor in Utah first who cleared me for international travel, but then just over a week later, my dad was driving me to the airport and I was trying not to cry. I was pretty bad like that, just completely spoiled. I could have killed my mom and brother, but I thought a few tears might cause my dad to turn the car around. Little did I know, he'd already transferred the 20 grand, so I was going to Jamaica if he had to fly me there himself. When I landed at the airport, there was something holding a sign with my name on it. I followed them to a car and they drove me about 3 hours to pretty much the opposite side of Jamaica, from the lush green pastures up into the dry and dusty hills. It was there that the Tranquility Bay facility was located, and after being taken inside, I was given my induction. The people were kind of nice and welcoming at first, but explained that that was the last time they'd act like that with me until the day I graduated. When my program started, I'd be at level 1, which meant that I'd be treated like crap. But as I advanced up through the levels, my treatment would supposedly get better and better. And after that, life as I knew it changed completely. As of that moment, I had 0 rights or liberties as a human being. I needed permission to speak, to stand, to walk anywhere, and the more I complied, the more I advanced. I wasn't allowed a bed at first, and I had to go to the bathroom in a bucket. But then as time went on, I was allowed to visit an actual bathroom and was given access to hot showers and better food. It might sound harsh, but it also might seem like a functional system. Your crazy parents send you there for a ton of money, then after your time is up, you've reached the 6th and highest level and you got to go home. But that's not how things worked out. My parents paid for 6 months, but I ended up staying for almost a year, and my parents had to pay out an extra $15,000 for the pleasure. I did everything I could to get home within that 6 months, but the program leaders did everything they could to stop me. They found just about any reason to demote you down a level or two, and it was all a scam to keep the kids there longer than they needed to be. Anyone who tried to actually rebel was punished, just with really menial stuff at first. But if they persisted, they were made to clean something to do with the facility's sewage system. I don't know exactly what it was. I never did anything to warrant the punishment, but kids regularly got sick after it, and that was the best incentive to stick with the program. When people ask what the standards of living were like, I tell them that for anyone below level 6, it was worse than prison. In U.S. prisons, a certain standard of hygiene is enforced, and prisoners get access to proper medical treatment. We had neither of those. The bugs were the worst part, though, as almost all the accommodation blocks were infested with sandflies and mosquitoes. Everyone below level 6 was covered in bug bites almost all the time, and it wasn't much better for the staff or level 6ers either. Anyone below level 3 wasn't allowed to wear shoes, and we were only allowed cold showers once a day. This meant that bug bites on their feet would get infected, and this happened to me personally. Kids called it fat foot, and it would cause your foot and ankle to balloon to double its size. You might think that this would warrant a trip to the hospital, but no. You were given antibiotic cream, some painkillers, and then you went about your day as usual. At the lower levels, fights were really common too. You put a bunch of spoiled brats together in near prisoner of war camp conditions, and you can bet your bottom dollar that they'll lash out at one another. You might think the Tranquility Bay staff would want to stop things like that, but in truth, it was useful to them. It allowed them to knock the offenders down a few levels, thus ensuring their parents' continued financial cooperation, and it also served as a great way of enforcing discipline in the higher ranks. You mess up, and you'd be back to fist-fighting to be first to use the bucket in the morning. Now, long story short, I did manage to get out, but only after I managed to convince my mom that the whole thing was a scam. And if she hadn't listened to me, I think I'd have ended up staying for another 6 months, meaning a year and a half in total. And just so you know, maybe I did get a little bit better, but it wasn't because of this Tranquility Bay. It was because I grew up. So a few weeks ago, I was working as a utility staff member in our Supermax unit of our prison. These 2 units are brand new and are separated from the rest of the prison. Now, as a utility, the job I serve is basically ensuring everything gets done, and I'm a first responder in the event that an emergency event unfolds. If you look at the other story that I wrote here before, I mentioned another staff member that I worked with who assisted me in the emergency that we handled. His name is D, and since then he is promoted to sergeant of this unit. Myself and D were having our 6th sense, so to speak. The tensions were high on Unit 1. We were feeling this all week. With these thoughts in mind, upper admin, including the warden, scheduled all of Unit 1A to be searched cell to cell in an effort to discard some contraband. For those uninitiated, most contraband are items inmates aren't allowed to have. These items range in severity, but we unanimously say the big-ticket items are weapons, drug, hooch, which is homemade alcohol, and cell phones. I know what you're thinking, and yes, they can get those items or make them in the prison. The time is 10:30 a.m., and this is usually designated as our first count time of our shift. So while we were conducting these mass searches, the rest of the institution is counting their inmates. I myself was helping the search team with anything they needed to help with the searches. We assumed that something could happen at any moment. However, while we were correct in our assumption, we unfortunately were wrong about the unit. The events are as followed. At approximately 10:40 a.m., I had heard a call over the radio from Unit 2. We got 3 intoxicated inmates in cell over here. This actually elicited a head tilt and an eyebrow raise from me, as there are only 2 inmates per cell. I look down at D from one of the top-tier railings, and then the sergeant of Unit 2 gets on the radio and says, "I'll be down in a minute." The protocol for incorrect inmates in cells is to remove said inmate from the cell and place them in holding, a protocol that I assume the 2A sergeant was doing, and I was correct. The next radio traffic was something I wasn't expecting, and in all honesty, happened very quickly. When the Unit 2 sergeant made it to 2A, he called for the door to be opened on the radio, followed by, "Sergeant D, I need additional staff here." This was said in a calm voice, so it didn't ring any alarms in my head, and I started moving off 1A and leaving Unit 1 building towards Unit 2 building. Not even as I get fully out of the Unit 1 building, I then hear the most haunting radio traffic I think I've ever heard in all of my almost 5 years of service. "We need all available staff. Staff assault, staff assault. They have weapons." I've never ran so fast in my entire life. When I went through the front door to Unit 2 and made it to the 2A door, I banged so hard and yelled at the control station officer to run the damn door now, and when the door opened, it was absolute chaos. Now, whether or not it was a trick of the eye, the sun coming in from the windows, or maybe the pepper spray all over the ground, I'm not joking when I say that the unit had a red tint to it. It looked like I stepped into a literal depiction of hell. First thing I see is one staff member getting his face stomped in by an inmate. I assessed the situation and saw that the staff were already en route to help him, so I scanned more left. On the stairs leading up to the top tier, an inmate and staff member were fighting and rolling down the stairs. However, beneath those stairs was a staff member lying on the ground with an inmate on top of him, stabbing the staff member. I didn't even realize how fast I was running, and I started yelling, "Get off him now! Get off now!" The inmate didn't hear me, and by this point, I'm full-on sprinting at this. I will literally sit here and tell you, my inner monologue decided that we were choosing violence today and said, "We're gonna spear the F out of this guy." And I did. Hard. I mean, this guy literally turned, saw me coming, got eyes bigger than I'd ever seen before. Within a split second, I hit his ribs with my right shoulder and hit the ground. The next thing I remember is my eyes burning. Apparently, some pepper spray splashed in my eyes upon the impact of both of our bodies. And so here I am, blind on top of a dangerous criminal who's wielding a homemade knife. I managed to force my eyes open long enough to see this guy punching my head. As to not get in trouble here, I'm going to say multiple staff did dogpile on us, and we beat this dude down so he would drop the knife. After that, I got off the unit, eyes burning, shoulder hurting, and apparently blood around my neck with no pain or wound. Strange. However, it was when I went to the hospital and returned to work that I got to see the CCTV camera footage of the assaults. Apparently, as I hit this inmate square in the ribs, he raised his knife and goes to stab me in the left side of the neck. It was only the impact of us hitting the ground that his hand moved, and he stabbed me in the back instead. 7 of us went to the hospital that day with stab wounds, and today, I just had my first PTSD nightmare about this incident. I woke up in a pool of sweat and was having a panic attack. I vomited on the floor and finally calmed down. I try and play it off that I'm a very strong guy, and I am to a point, but even the strong have moments of weakness. As I lay here in bed and share this story, to all who read or listen to this, please, hug your loved ones tight when you see them. You never know when death will hit. And I'll end this story with one of my favorite quotes. You can be a king or a street sweeper, but everyone dances with the Grim Reaper. I grew up in the Chicago suburb of Skokie, which is about 10 to 11 miles north of downtown Chicago. I had a pretty regular, uneventful childhood. Almost everything before the age of 11 is a blur of just happy memories. I wasn't bullied in school. I never broke any bones falling off my bike. I was just kind of ignorant, a happy-go-lucky preteen boy with not so much as a care in the world. That all changed one Saturday after a visit to my grandma Pearl's house. I remember I was almost at the end of 5th grade, and we went to my grandma's house one Saturday for dinner. I loved my grandma Pearl, but my God, were her trips to her place boring for me. My mom and dad forbade me from ever bringing along my Game Boy as they thought that it would be rude, but then they also didn't seem to notice when I inevitably wandered off to try and keep myself entertained. Normally, I'd just wander off, explore her house, and wait until dinner was ready, but on this particular Saturday, I was feeling hungry. I went and asked Grandma how much longer dinner would be and felt my heart sink when I heard her say, "Not for at least another hour, sweetie." I walked into the kitchen, out of sight from my parents and Grandma, and then peered into the little oven window to see what we were having. I think it was some type of brisket or some other kind of roast. I just remember seeing it sizzling away and wanting to speed up the process. So, dumb 11-year-old me decides to crank up the heat. I wasn't so dumb that I cranked up the dial and then walked away. I stayed put in the kitchen, keeping an eye on the meat as it got browner and browner. Eventually, I started to smell a slight burning, but it still smelled okay, and the meat hadn't gotten black or anything, so I just went back to what I was doing, then figured I'd just check back in a few minutes. I don't know if something occupied my attention a little too long or if the temperature of the meat was suddenly such that it burst into flames, but the next thing I remember, I could see black smoke coming out of the oven, so I panicked. I ran into the living room, told my grandma that something was burning, so she got up and followed me into the kitchen. I ran up to the oven, pointed at the black smoke, and watched my grandma's expression suddenly and drastically change. I knew I was going to be in trouble if they found out that I ruined dinner, but the way my grandma started acting really scared me. I'd never seen her look so, I don't know, not mad, but horrified. And because I don't know what she was feeling, I assumed the worst and thought that my sweet old grandma was about to explode on me. Only she didn't, and I can barely even describe the feelings of fear and confusion I felt when she suddenly laid down on the kitchen floor and curled up into a ball. I remember how her eyes were wide, staring off at nothing as she sort of whispered something that I couldn't hear. There were only a few moments of that confusion before my parents appeared in the kitchen, my dad stepping over my grandma to deal with the burnt meat situation, while my mom kneeled next to Grandma asking, Mom, are you okay?" I had no idea what was happening. I just knew that I'd somehow caused it all by burning dinner, and I felt god-awful about it. Dad drove me back home. He was irate with me, but I was pretty angry at myself, too. All I wanted was to eat dinner a little easier, and now I'd be lucky if I got a PB&J after being banished to my room for giving my grandma a heart attack. That's honestly what I thought it was at first, and even when my dad said it wasn't a heart attack, I still had this terrible feeling that something equally awful had happened, something that was all my fault. My dad stayed home after I went up to my room and lay under my covers just crying, while my mom stayed with my grandma to make sure that she was okay. She returned home later that night, by which point it was way past my bedtime, but even so, they wake me up, sit on my bed, and have a little talk with me. I won't tell you everything they said to me, or this would take hours to write up, but the long and short of it was, my grandma had lived through World War II. My parents gave me a full history lesson right there in bed and explained why the smell of burning meat had upset my grandma so much. I remember being absolutely gripped with horror the entire way through. I couldn't believe that people could be so evil to each other over something so small and arbitrary. And it killed me to think that my own selfishness had brought back such horrific memories from my grandma, who had escaped a place called Sobibor in the 1940s. She moved to America when the war was over, met my grandpa, and the rest is history. I guess my mom and dad thought the best thing to do was to just be honest with me, having probably realized that my fear of the unknown would hurt worse than the dark truth. I suppose in hindsight it was the best thing to do, but it still messed with my head so bad that I barely slept a wink that night. I called my grandma the next day to apologize for scaring her, and told her that my parents had explained all that she'd been through. She obviously didn't want me to know, and I guess my mom and dad were complicit in shielding me from that ugly truth. I suppose it's like a lot of things with kids. You want to keep them as innocent as possible until absolutely necessary, then just hope they're equipped to deal with it. Truth be told, I didn't even know I was Jewish, or at least had Jewish ancestry. My mom didn't practice her religion, and her parents didn't mind if she married someone who didn't either. It wasn't like she was ashamed of her heritage or anything, she just learned that a lot of Jewish holidays brought back awful memories for my grandma, so our place became a kind of safe space for her. I'm not a religious person myself, none of that really interests me, but just like my mom, I still have a reverence for those that came before, or as my grandma called them, the survivors. This was in the mid-2000s when I was in about 2nd or 3rd grade. I lived in the rural Midwest and went to a decent-sized elementary school. For a few weeks, a friend of mine I chatted with often was absent from school. I was confused and curious as to why he hadn't been attending school for so many days, and soon I found out from the other kids in the school that he was taking time to rest and recover after a very traumatic experience in his family. I'm not going to reveal names as, for one, I don't remember the boy's name, and I don't want to reveal any personal info about those names that I do remember. And for the sake of easier reading, I'll call the boy who was absent Mike. The standard chats and occasional gossip I'd shared with friends on the playground and in the cafeteria took a very dark turn once word got out of why Mike was absent. You see, one day, a friend of mine, we'll call him Chad, told us that Mike's mother was murdered. Hearing later from some of the school employees, my own parents, I found out that this horrific act was carried out by the boyfriend of Mike's sister. The killer had snuck into the bedroom of his girlfriend's mother. He then either stabbed her to death or slit her throat in her sleep. I don't remember the exact details. I was only around 9 or 10 years old, so hearing this was especially shocking. Having something like that happen so close to me, even more so. I'm not quite sure how reliable this is, but according to Chad, the mother didn't want her daughter's relationship to get intimate until she and her boyfriend were married. She also didn't want them to get married until they had been together for a few years and she had gotten to know the guy well enough to know that he would treat her daughter well. The sister's boyfriend was furious at this and believed that the best way to get what he wants would be to eliminate what he saw as a roadblock. I was disgusted and disturbed at such a selfish, pathetic, and creepy move. This so-called man murdered an innocent woman just because he wanted to get intimate with her daughter and was delusional enough to believe that she would go along with him after he carried out the gruesome act. I remember one day on the way back home from school, my mom pointed out that the funeral procession was happening around the neighborhood we lived in. It honestly surprised me that it was that close to where we live. I remember seeing Mike in his black suit and tie with a very somber and serious look on his face. At school, I remember him being a pretty easygoing, cheerful guy who enjoyed cracking jokes with me. Seeing him like this hurt, and I can only imagine how this terror had affected him. Horror like this seems like it would stay with you, but honestly, I only just remember it, and there's still so many details that I don't quite recall. I don't even remember if Mike ever came back to school for the rest of the semester or not. If he did, I have no idea what I would have even said to him. What the hell do you even say to someone who had just had their life so cruelly changed at a young age? What do you say to someone whose mother was just taken from them by some heartless monster? Something about my memory of this being hazy unnerves me, and I wonder if being hit with this cold reality at such a young age influenced my often cynical outlook of the world. I hope Mike and his family are doing well because no one deserves to have to go through that. This happened years ago when I had gotten my first actual job. I didn't think much of it. I figured it was harmless. I could find people around the country to chat with, learn about some other cultures, all that kind of stuff. I wouldn't give out personal information about myself, no phone number, address, or anything like that. I wasn't stupid. What I'm referring to is having a pen pal. You see, I was bored, no friends in my city, all my friends were back in my hometown, and I wanted to fill time in loneliness and talk to people. I heard about these websites to meet pen pals around the world. I made a simple profile, stated what kind of friends that I was interested in making, just basic stuff. After about a month, I received a message from a man. I don't remember it word for word, but it basically said, "Hi, I found your profile and I'm super interested in being friends." He then stated that he lives in the same state as me. Even though he was 58 years old, he seemed really chill. Though I know maybe it was rude to be snobby about someone in my state contacting me, I did politely say on my profile that I was trying to find some pen pals outside of the US. I responded politely though, and I replied to a few of his messages for a while. I found out that he lived in the same city as me. "I see you like anime. I love anime. I also see that you've been to Japan. I've been to Japan too. Do you go to anime conventions? Maybe we could go together to the next convention that comes to town." I felt a little uncomfortable. I put right on my page that I have no intention to meet up with anyone, just to have an online pen pal. I politely told him that, and he didn't like it. He says, "I just thought we could be friends, since we have similar interests." I again politely told him I'm not interested in meeting anyone in person from the website. He pretended to be fine with it and went right back to rambling about his interests. I logged out of the website for a few days and just focused on my personal life, going to work and doing school and taking care of my disabled father. One day I woke up to notifications on multiple of my instant messaging apps, all stating basically the same thing. "Hey, it's me from the pen pal website," smiley face. He messaged me on like 4 of my chat apps, which I did not give him. How did he find them? I was really annoyed at that point, and as politely as I could be, I messaged him on the pen pal website saying, "Hey, so I don't know how you found my IDs for my chat apps, but that was kind of over the line. That wasn't really appropriate. Not one app, but you messaged me on like 4. I'm sorry, but I really wanted to talk to you, and you haven't been on the website for a few days." Well, that doesn't make it okay. I also have a personal life and a job and a family. I can't spend all my time on here. Well, that's why I messaged you on those apps. I don't have them listed on my profile. How did you find them? And he avoided the subject. I'm sorry that I did that. I'm just trying to be your friend. I just want to be friends with you. This isn't the way to do it. I'm very uncomfortable that you somehow found that information that I didn't give you. I don't think we should talk anymore. I don't want to be friends with you, I'm sorry, and please don't contact me again. I immediately blocked him on all of those apps and on the pen pal website. For a few months, everything was fine. Suddenly, I got a message on one of those apps and the user wasn't in my friends list, and the message was basically as follows. "You stupid, fat, ugly girl. No one will ever love you. You'll never find a man to love you. You're so incredibly fat and ugly. Why don't you just take your own life? Do the world a favor." I rolled my eyes and blocked the account. Throughout the course of a year, every few months across my multiple social media platforms, I was being harassed. I had completely forgotten about the man until I received a message on the pen pal website. The account had no name or photos, it was just a random username. The message I received was the same nonsense as before, calling me fat and ugly and saying all sorts of terrible things about me, telling me I should die. Once I got the message on that website, I knew that it had to be him. I had no other issues with anyone else. I replied saying that guy's name, telling him I knew it was him and that his behavior is really sad and pathetic. "I just wanted to be your friend. You're disgusting. Watch your back." Then, the account blocked me. For a few more months, nothing really happened. I got 1 or 2 messages from fake accounts again, but I had grown used to it and just immediately blocked them. Then one day, I received a Facebook message from a police officer. He was contacting me about a profile I apparently made on a website called Ashley Madison. It is used for people to have affairs and hookups. I had never heard of it before then and absolutely did not have an account there. I had a long talk with him where he told me his department investigates human trafficking and thought that I was an underage girl, possibly in danger. I had my personal Facebook account listed on the profile as well as other ways to contact me, and I was in shock. He advised me to contact the website and ask them to take down the profile, but he said, "You seem like a sweet girl. I don't know who you made angry, but don't read the profile." My curiosity got the better of me, but I should have taken his advice. Using some of my normal selfies, an account was made and the profile stated a lot of horrible things, very derogatory. It made me sick to my stomach to read some of the things it said that I apparently wanted to have done to me. Thankfully, the website took quick action to take down the profile. The next time I got one of those hate messages online, I snapped. I didn't hold back, cursing him out for being so immature and disgusting because someone simply didn't want to be his friend. The account blocks me without answering. I didn't get a message from any accounts for a while. One day, when I was closer at work, I was waiting outside for my family member to pick me up. I didn't have my own vehicle, and my family would give me rides to and from work. As I was listening to music, waving goodbye to my manager as they drove off, I got a notification on one of my apps. It said, "You're disgusting and ugly." I sighed, rolling my eyes as I opened the message. As I was typing, another message came in that made me stop typing and freeze up. "You're all alone. I could kill you right now if I wanted to. No one would ever find you." I backed up against the building. I didn't have keys, and only the manager did, who just left. I looked around through the parking lot, not a car in sight. The street lights shined dimly around me. My heart started to race as more messages came in. "You're so disgusting, you know that. No one will ever fall in love with you. Your family probably won't even miss you. You're gross. I should just kill you right now." I started to cry, the phone shaking in my hands just as another text came in. A car pulled up in front of me. It was my family member coming to pick me up. I took a deep breath and quickly got into the car. "Hey, sorry I'm late. I got stuck in 2 red lights. Your manager already left? They just left you alone out here?" "Just drive." I accidentally screamed at them, tears starting to come down my face. "What's wrong? Did something happen at work?" I was crying, shaking. They took my phone and looked at it and saw the messages. "What? Who's texting you?" "I don't know who it is. Just drive. I want to get out of here." We went back to their place and they called the police, but I told them not to. I had no idea who they were, where to find them, and to make a police report against them. Instead, they called another family member who works in the IT field. After they heard the whole story, everything I've endured for almost 2 years, they told me that I should have made new accounts from the beginning of this harassment. I listened to them, and right then and there I made new accounts on all my social media. I worked at that job for another month, but my family member had told my manager what had happened, so I was never put on closing shifts again. I was only given morning shifts where I clocked out of work when the sun was still out, but I still didn't feel safe. They knew where I worked. My manager understood when I quit. And all the harassment stopped. To this day, I still haven't received any more of those messages. And now I'm married. I still live in the city and I don't live in that neighborhood anymore. I feel comfortable and I don't feel afraid that this person will find me and stalk me again. But even now, anytime I get a random message from someone who isn't in my friends list, my heart races for just a second. I'm a girl, and this happened when I was 20 in the early 2000s. People used landlines, and cell phones were not unlimited, obviously, and this happened in a town about an hour away from Sacramento. My friend was house-sitting for a family that her family was friends with from church. She was to house-sit in the country just outside of town for a week. They had animals like cats, rabbits, a donkey, and a horse. The family also had dogs too, but the family took the dogs with them. My friend was in charge of feeding the animals and watching the place. She didn't have to get the mail daily because they had this metal lockbox-style mailbox down their long driveway. They didn't have any neighbors for miles, just fields of alfalfa, cattle, and corn, so I guess the lockbox was for safety or something. Towards the end of the week, she asked if I wanted to spend the night and keep her company, and I thought it sounded fun. I had moved out of my aunt and uncle's and gotten my own apartment, so I told her that I'd pick her up on the way there after I got out of work. We got there at around 9:30 p.m., grabbing dinner on the way. We went into the barn first thing and fed the animals. It was late for their dinner and they made their hunger known with their animal noises, and we made sure that they had water, then went inside. The house was this big ranch-style house, single story. The living room was to the left as you walked into the home. There was a long hallway directly to the right of the entrance that led to where the bathroom and bedrooms were. Straight ahead was a dining area, and to the left of that was the kitchen area and a patio door. They did not have an open floor plan. In the kitchen on the opposite side from the dining area, there was a long hall with several doors. My friend explained that the wife ran a daycare center out of the house. These rooms were play areas for the kids that she took care of. We didn't bother going over there because we had no interest, and we watched some TV, ate our leftovers, and talked about people we knew. As it got later, she turned on the house alarm and said that she didn't like sleeping in other people's beds, so she had been sleeping on the couch and then offered it to me. She would sleep on one of the two huge recliners that reclined so far back that it was almost flat. The chairs were really comfortable, so I just said that I'd take the chair. I went and laid back in a chair with my blanket. We turned off the TV and talked for maybe 20 minutes in the dark when the motion sensor floodlights started shining through the window, lighting up the room. Now, I really have no idea why people in the country think it's okay to not have curtains or blinds because, to me, that's kind of insane. We both got quiet and Amanda said, "Maybe it's just one of the cats." Then we started hearing gravel crunch, like a person walking across gravel in the parking area outside. My chair was closest to the window and I slid carefully down to the floor, clutching the stupid blanket the whole time. The floodlight timed out and my friend slid to the floor too. We laid on our stomachs in the dark, not knowing what to do for a minute, when we heard a loud bang, and all of a sudden, the house alarm started blaring and the floodlights turned on again. It was so loud we covered our eyes and started to panic. I swear I've never been so close to peeing my pants in my life. I began crawling toward the keypad for the security because I've seen the commercials. There's a button you push and a person responds to you in case of an emergency, or at least sends the police. The main screen said, "Patio 1 of 2 open." Amanda started to cry a little and hit the call assistance button on the pad and nothing happened. There's no assistance. I asked her where the phone was and she said that there's a phone in the kitchen and one in the parents' room down the hall. So our choices were to go to the kitchen, past the windows, and next to one of the patio doors, or to go down the hall to the parents' room and use the phone there. I asked where the other patio is and she said it was in the daycare part of the house. It was an easy decision. We went inside the parents' room and it was pitch black. I asked her where the phone was and she said, "I think we have to turn on a light." I really didn't want to turn on a light, but had no choice. I didn't have a flashlight and I didn't bring my cell phone because I had limited minutes. It was a simpler time and Amanda didn't even get her own cell until after this happened. She turned on the light and we started looking around the room. Not only did these people not have curtains on any window, but they didn't even have closet doors. We saw a golf club leaning against the wall by the bed. They probably have it instead of a baseball bat, which is what I had next to my bed at home. We figured that if we hit someone with it, it's going to leave a mark, and she grabbed it, and we continued our search for the phone. Looking at the obvious places, we found a cordless phone stand minus the actual phone. The alarm was still raging. We had a light on, and the person who opened the patio door was bound to notice, is all I was thinking at this point. She asked, "Should we use the locate phone buttons?" I looked at her and responded, "Yeah, if you want some strange guy coming in here with it and asking if you were looking for something." I'm getting mad that I'm scared and in this situation. Standing there, knowing that we have to go to the kitchen, the house alarm stopped. It got country quiet. If you lived in the country, you know what I'm talking about. There isn't another golf club for me to grab, so I make her go out first, flipping every light on and keeping the doors that we pass in the hall closed. We double-check the security panel and it still says patio open. Hit call button and it still doesn't work. Double-checking the front door is locked, we start for the kitchen. I tell her that we have to check the patio near the kitchen, and I grab a big knife that wasn't even close to being sharp from the kitchen, and we check the patio door near the kitchen and it's locked. We turn on all the lights, grab the phone, and dial 911. The phone isn't a cordless phone. It's one of the old ones with a cord attached to a wall. My friend is on the phone with the dispatcher telling her what happened, and I hear a whistle coming from outside the kitchen window. The thing people don't think about, because I didn't in my thinking that safety was turning on the lights, is while you have the reflection of the inside on the window, people on the outside have a clear view of you. Unless you press your face against the window, that is. I hear the whistle again. It sounds like someone trying to get someone else's attention, that kind of whistle, but I don't see anything outside, and I'm not pressing my face to the window to see if I'm the person they're whistling for. My friend is still talking to the dispatcher and is crying and saying she doesn't have the address to the house. She hands me the phone and I say, "Hello?" The dispatcher lady, who sounds annoyed, tells me she needs an address to send the police to. I ask that she just trace the call, and she says something like, "You're house sitting. You don't even know where you're at?" Scared, angry, and overwhelmed, I hand the phone back to Amanda and start looking for something with an address in the kitchen. I'm looking in the junk drawer, on the counter, on the refrigerator, fully keeping an eye down the hall that has the daycare rooms, knowing that on the other side of one of those doors is a patio door that was opened. Amanda tells the lady that she doesn't pick up the mail because of their lockbox, and then, a few seconds later, removes the phone from her ear and stares at me with a blank face. I ask her if they're tracing the call because I cannot find anything with an address. Amanda tells me, "She said I hope the police find you in time," and hung up the phone. I was now really scared and angry at the same time. We knew that there were people outside. We knew that the patio door to the daycare area was open. We did not know what to do. We stood in the kitchen silently for what seemed like forever, but it was probably only 1 minute. I picked up the phone and dialed 411. I told Amanda that they would have the number for the police department. As calmly as I could, I explained what was happening to us to 411. I included the 911 dispatcher and said that we really needed the phone number of the town's police department directly. Then, we heard a loud, metallic bang outside the kitchen window by the patio door. It sounded like someone dropped something metal and heavy. Amanda started crying, and I couldn't hold in my fear any longer, so I started crying too. The 411 operator said that they were connecting us and would stay on the line with us after getting upset at the 911 dispatcher on our behalf. A police officer answered the phone, and the 411 operator started explaining what was happening to the police. They were asked to disconnect once we had an established connection. The police asked a few questions, and we heard the whistle again outside, and floodlights all around the house turned on again. I was too scared to look outside, and we had never turned on the patio light because we had to walk past the patio window to get to the switch. We told the policeman on the phone about the whistle, and he said that several policemen should be showing up shortly and to stay on the phone. We were just outside the town limits and knew that it might take a few minutes. Having an officer on the phone made me feel a little bit better, but it was still really scary. He told us that police have arrived and were coming up the drive. The policeman said to put down the phone and open the door, so I did. What I saw was a police pickup truck with spotlights flashing into the pastures that ran along both sides of the drive. 2 officers, not with handguns but with shotguns, were walking slowly beside the truck as it came up the long drive. 4 officers approached the house and asked us our names. One went to the phone and said that they were here and hung up the phone. They ordered us to stay in the dining room and began searching the house and property. One by one, they returned. The last one came back in through the patio door by the kitchen. He said he searched the barn and the horse scared him, and the horse also looked spooked. He asked what other animals were in the barn. They told us that they didn't find anyone and that the daycare patio was not locked. There was, however, a broom handle in the track to prevent it from being opened too far. I looked at the patio door that the officer entered through and saw that there was not a broom handle in that one. Then I felt dumb because he just walked through it. They lectured Amanda about not knowing the address of the house that she was supposed to be responsible for and other stuff I don't remember. And after finishing statements, they said they'd stick around and look more, and if we wanted to leave, we could. They could lock the bottom lock, but not activate the alarm, and we were cool with that. And we left there so fast. We got into my car and went to her mom's. So mentally exhausted, we fell asleep, and I went to my office job the next morning. She said she really didn't want to go back to the house, but she had to feed the animals their breakfast. Her mom told her to take her sister, and she did. That afternoon, she called me at work. She was really nervous and began to tell me that when they went into the house, there were footprints and poop on the carpet. I said it was probably the cop that checked the barn, and she said that she didn't know or pay attention. Also, she said that when they went into the barn to feed and water the animals in the morning, someone had tied all the rabbits' legs together in their hutches. They had 10 rabbits the kids used for 4-H, and Amanda then continued to say that there was a note with the word "lucky" scribbled on the back of a pizza coupon that she thought came from the refrigerator door because the flyer was missing a coupon. It took a while for them to untie the rabbits, and Amanda asked her mom to find someone else for their church to finish their house sitting. She wasn't going back. She also told the officer what she came back to, but no one was ever caught, and the police never called either of us to update us. This is a story that was only recently unlocked in my memory within the last week or so. I think I forced myself to forget it because it was just so creepy. So flashback to around 2010. I was about 9 or 10 years old, and it was a lovely summer's evening in the Midwest. My buddy, who I'll call Chase for this story, invited me and 2 of my other friends in the neighborhood over for a sleepover. Like I said, we were at an age where close adult supervision was starting to slip, and Chase's house was a great spot for unsupervised shenanigans. Chase was adopted by a relatively older couple. I remember his parents being in their late 50s, while most of the rest of ours were in their late 30s or even early 40s. His father was paralyzed from the legs down while serving in the Gulf War and required caretakers, and his mom was some kind of business executive who wasn't in town too much. In addition to this, Chase's only sibling was much older and had already moved out for college by this time, so whenever we were hanging out there, there was almost never any eyes on us. We never did anything bad, but typical stupid stuff you'd imagine kids at that time would do. Shooting airsoft guns, putting all kinds of crazy seasonings into instant ramen, staying up late playing M-rated games that none of us had yet, all that kind of stuff. Chase's house was also by far the biggest house in the neighborhood too, sitting on top of a hill with a gate, a big long driveway, and a huge yard that surrounded the perimeter of the house that backed into a wooded area which eventually led into a state forest. This one particular night, Chase has the idea that we should set up a tent in the woods and camp out for the night. While I don't think any of us were jumping out of our skin to do this, we all complied on the condition that we stayed at the edge of the woods so we could use the bathroom and get snacks easily from the house. We set the tent up, laid out our sleeping bags, grabbed as much junk food as physically possible, and hung out in the tent for the night. We goofed around for a few hours even after the sun sets until the sugar high dies off and the unhealthy food settles in. We one by one started to fall asleep. I was usually the first one to crash at sleepovers, and tonight was no different. However, this sleep was not for long. I get woken up by someone shaking me out of the pitch black. As my eyes adjust, the concerned face of my friend comes into focus. Before I can chew him out for waking me up, he whispers, "Do you hear that?" I sat up and carefully listened until I hear the noise that he's talking about, noticing another one of my friends was awake too. It was a whistle. Somebody out in the woods was whistling. Each whistle was drawn out and breathy, followed by another equally drawn-out note. Even writing about this now still gives me goosebumps. From the sounds of it, it wasn't that close, but not that far either. I'm sure my expression turned to that of horror as my other friend woke the last friend up. We all sit in silence and listen for a minute to try and determine the direction of the whistling. It could have been coming from the house. Maybe one of Chase's dad's caretakers decided to stay the night, which didn't usually happen. But it didn't take long to realize that the whistling was coming from the woods, and not only was it coming from there, but it was getting closer. With that, we were out of there. It probably took us 15 seconds to get our shoes on and sprint to the front porch. We left everything in there, our snacks, pillows, sleeping bags, Nintendo DSs. We didn't dare to go back. Under the light of his heavily illuminated driveway, which was basically a mini parking lot, we all gained a newfound confidence. At this time, we managed to convince ourselves that we weren't scared, so we got our airsoft guns from the garage and started talking trash and shooting into the woods, basically trying to intimidate or shoot whoever was out there. As we were yelling like a bunch of idiots, we weren't able to hear anything. But at some point, when we cooled down, we listened intently and didn't hear anything. Knowing that, we were satisfied and went to sleep on the floor of his living room after playing a little Xbox. While that experience was creepy, what was really terrifying was what happened the next morning. We all woke up and started talking about how creepy everything that happened last night was, and under the light of day, made the walk down to the tent. As we got closer, we noticed something looked off about the tent. It had been completely trashed. The rain tarp had been mostly pulled off, and it looked like one corner of the tent had been caved in, like someone broke one of the poles. Yeah, we had left in a hurry, but it felt hard to believe 4 10-year-olds could do this much damage in that time. Making our way over to the front of the tent, my face dropped when we saw the true extent of the carnage. Everything inside was completely trashed. Our snacks had been dumped out and seemingly stomped on. Several of the sleeping bags and pillows had been thrown into the woods. Chase's DS had been snapped in half, and worst of all, one of the sides of the tent had slits all the way along the side of it, as if some psycho had a stabbing frenzy when he realized that there was nobody in there. All of us said shockingly little about it, despite all the bravado that we had, boasting about how we scared off whoever was in the woods the previous night and earlier that morning. The 4 of us packed up the tent, gathered the stuff we could, brought it back to the house, and then our other 2 friends hopped on our bikes and headed home. Nobody mentioned it to their parents, partly out of fear of trouble and partly to delegitimize what just happened. Chase's family would have never have used that tent again anyway, and I'm sure he just convinced his parents to buy him a new DS and said he lost it. After this sleepover, we all kind of naturally separated as friends. It was at the end of our summer of 5th grade, and Chase ended up going to a private middle school while the rest of us went to a public one, where we were then separated into different cliques. I never thought about the incident again until I ran into one of the other friends there recently when I was back in my hometown visiting family. After catching up, we exchanged numbers, and recently, after seeing a Reddit thread about submitting your own scary stories, all of these memories came rushing back. I texted him, asking if he remembers that night, and he called me right after and basically laid out every single detail exactly as I remembered it. Immediately after, I spent the last half hour writing all of this down on my phone. If there's any takeaway from this, is that you should always stick to that instant gut instinct that you get when something seems off, because if it seems like it, it probably is. I'll preface this story by saying this is a throwaway account, and I've never opened up about this story because it's taken me a long time to let this sink in. My story isn't a life-threatening one, such as the other ones here, but I felt the need to let this off my chest. The story starts off with me at 12 years old, diving into the world of puppy love and awkward first romantic encounters. I was called terrible names in my classroom during an age when no one actually understood what that entailed, since I was openly liked by at least 5 guys in our class, and this only made my self-esteem fall even lower as they called me these names. I was overly friendly at this time because when you're young, insecure, and often verging on taking your own life, you tend to overcompensate. This meant that I was close to the class outcasts, the ones that were on the spectrum of Naruto running through the halls to socially anxious, and one of these guys was my stalker. You see, Stalker was a casual friend. We'd share lengthy conversations about video games and random YouTubers, you know the kind. He was a socially awkward guy, but pretty harmless. He just had these neckbeard tendencies that were concealed behind the fact that he was a generally well-put-together guy. On the last day of classes, he'd confessed that he was attracted to me and asked if I'd be open to dating him. I felt bad for him, and with that pity, I just said yes. The good girl complex that I had was taking full control, even if every inch of my brain was saying no. It was casual and awkward. I treated it like a friendship with commitment. There were a few red flags, like him tracking my location from my messages, but I thought it was harmless. Eventually, I broke it off. The whole ordeal just left a bad taste in my mouth, and I didn't want to keep it going any longer as I felt that 6 months was probably enough to validate breaking it off. After all, we were 13. Who the hell took relationships at that stage seriously? Well, it turns out he did. He looked at us as meant to be because it turns out we were actually friends during childhood, and he held on to that. To quote-unquote win me back, he would often message incessantly, try to talk to me in school, even following me whenever I needed to go to the bathroom, and even going as far as coming to my house unannounced. At that point, I was alarmed, especially with the thought that he was probably following me home with how quickly he'd arrived after I got home from school. Still, good girl mentality in check, I thought that I could just turn this into a friendship. He made it very clear that it wasn't going to be that way. He would pick fights with anybody that I liked. It was excruciating, and he would often force me to hang out with him. At one point, turning to grab me by the arm while I was with my friends, and only stopping once my friends defended me, I felt both powerless and weak. Once we moved, he would still show up to my doorstep unannounced. This understandably freaked me out, and by the time I was still trying to make it a friendship while he still insisted on being more than that, I was young, confused, and scared while I was being blamed for all of this for leading him on or even engaging him in the first place. He often used the excuse needing closure to talk to me or get my attention, and you'll see how overused that becomes. It reached a point where I was constantly looking over my shoulder and going through lengths just to avoid because he would wait by my regular routes to have an excuse to walk with me and talk. I changed the places that I frequented, making sure that I was always surrounded by my friend group, and go as far as ducking past his class to make sure that he doesn't follow me as I walked to the bathroom. Whenever the doorbell rang, I would freeze. I was anxious about leaving the house because I always thought that he might be on his way to my home. Once he caught on to this, he ended up spilling a sob story to our guidance counselor. I suppose she felt bad, which explains why she had me pulled out of class, only to be ambushed into having a lengthy, unnecessary conversation with him where he pretty much used the "I need closure" excuse. Instead of talking about closure, he talked as if though he didn't have me pulled out of class to discuss closure. My mom ended up chewing out the guidance counselor for doing so. Still, the damage was done. At that point, I thought I'd be safe, and as much as he was a lot less stalky, for lack of a better word, he was still there, like a looming presence. I always felt his stare. His friends would act weird around me, and I still felt paranoid and terrified. One day, we had a new exchange student. New girl, for the sake of the story, who everyone was quick to point out looked like me. The resemblance was uncanny. We ended up becoming close friends, and she told me that during her first week, a group of guys began pointing at her, calling out my name, and one of them began messaging her and hitting on her. This was her first encounter with being mistaken as me, and we decided to have a bit of fun with this, often pranking others by doing a little switcheroo. I would send her down the hallway before me, and to our surprise, this caught his attention. He would stop her in the hallway, only for him to leave her alone once I popped out behind her. It usually left him dumbfounded, giving us time to walk away as he processed it. This left me slightly comforted that I could confuse him, and New Girl didn't seem to mind. She and I ended up dating, surprise, surprise. I was a lesbian this whole time. He took personal offense to this, often making weird remarks about it. He was still being creepy at the time, leaving notes on my desk on a semi-regular basis. My anxiety grew with this. I then ended up moving schools and thought that would be the end of it. In a way, it was, because that severely limited our ability to encounter each other. At one point, though, my old school sports team had gone to our school along with teams from other schools for a regional inter-school competition, and I was actually anxious and refused to leave my classroom for that week. At one point, he blocked me, unblocked me, got a girlfriend, and I thought that that was the end of it. As of now, the story has come to its conclusion, and how it ended was with a Twitter conversation. He messaged me asking for closure again, and war flashbacks ensued. I left the conversation happen. He took time to gloat about his happy relationship with the perfect girl, who creepily had a noticeable resemblance. Say what you will about it, but I wish he was happy enough to have just left me alone. So, a 5-year stalker. I'm still terrified of walking alone, still looking over my shoulder no matter how irrational, and fall into paranoia constantly. I'm happy now, but I don't think I'll ever lose that anxiety I was left with. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. EST, and there are super fun live streams every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday night. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, get your vitamin D from those moist cookies.